They told me I should die with my husband. Those words landed like ice in my chest. I still hear them sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the clock is louder than any radio. Sarah said it. My daughter-in-law. And Michael, my son, he only nodded, like he agreed it was sensible. It was after Tom's last breath. The machines had stopped, the nurse had closed her folder, and the room smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon. I had been there at his side for weeks. I had watched him go thinner and paler, and I had cupped his hand and whispered little things, old jokes, names of streets we walked when we were young, the song we danced to in the kitchen. I thought my son would stand beside me. I thought he would take my hand and say, "We're here, Mom." Instead, Sarah leaned close, laughing under her breath. She should die with him, she said, loud enough for the corner of the room to hear. We don't need an old woman in the house. She's just a bill. For a second the world stopped moving. The fluorescent light hummed. People in the hallway passed by like ghosts. I felt the floor leave me. My legs carried me out without thought. I walked through the night with Tom's hospital blanket under my arm like a flag I could not let go. I walked past the bakery where we used to bicker and the park where Michael learned to tie his shoes. I walked until my throat was raw and my shoes were splashed with rain. Therefore, I did not go back into that quiet house. I did not stand in their doorway asking for pity. I went home to the small place Tom and I had fixed together, the one with paint flaking on the porch and a crooked step. I lit the old lamp, though the glass was dusty, and I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. My chest was a stone. My mind spun like the ceiling fan we never used anymore. But tears did not come easy. I think grief sometimes freezes your throat. So I thought instead. I remembered. I opened the little wooden box Tom had carved with his rough hands the year we married. Inside were buttons, a lock of hair tied with thread, a faded photograph of us by the river. I touched the photo and felt warmth I was not ready to let go. I remembered how we had built our house with our hands and laughter, how we had painted the nursery blue with our first baby in mind. I remembered late nights beside a lamp, counting pennies and dreaming bigger than our pockets. Therefore, I made a promise to myself. I would not vanish because a woman with sharper teeth said I ought to. I would not let sorrow close me like a tomb. Tom had worked too hard beside me. He had loved too fiercely to have his memory become a whisper. I would live. I would stand. I would make a life that did not ask for permission. But living after loss is not simple or pretty. The first grocery bill with only one name on it is heavy. The first Christmas without his laugh is hollow. Friends sent casseroles and soft cards that said, with deeper sympathy, and then they went back to their dinners and their lights. Michael and Sarah came once, perfunctory and polite, and they stayed only as long as the coffee was warm. They did not say the words Sarah had thrown at me like stones. They did not offer a hand or a home. Their absence was its own sharpness. Therefore, I went to work. I had always known how to make things with my hands. I braided rugs, I mended torn sleeves, I baked the kind of bread that made people come back for more. I went to the diner early and wiped tables until my shoulders ached. I sewed curtains for neighbors and patched 1,001 knees. I did not tell them at the big house about the work. I did not want their pity, wrapped in reasons and explanations. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. But the work taught me something I had forgotten, the dignity of small labor. There is a quiet courage in carrying groceries for a neighbor. There is pride in a table set with your own hands. People began to look at me not as an empty chair but as someone who still moved and gave and fixed. Mrs. Perez at the corner store slipped me an apple once when I had nothing in my purse. The mailman whistled when he saw me filling my mailbox. A young man from church came one afternoon and fixed my leaky faucet without charge. Little things stitch me back together. Therefore, I learned to fold grief into my days. Mornings I would sweep the floor and feel the broom keep rhythm with my breath. Afternoons I sewed until the sun painted the kitchen in gold. Nights I sat by the window with a cup of tea and let memories come like old songs. I spoke to Tom sometimes, like you talk to a friend on a walk. I did not ask for miracles. I asked for tiny mercies, a warm day, an unexpected bill paid, a text from Michael that said, "Thinking of you." But those texts did not come. But I will tell you this, child, strength is not always thunder. Sometimes strength is a quiet thing that keeps showing up when no one sees. It is the woman who irons her shirt even when her hands tremble. It is the person who returns the grocery cart to the rack because someone else needs it. It is the grandmother who makes a blanket for her grandchild even though her eyes sting with sorrow. Therefore, I chose that kind of strength. I mended, I baked, I gave. I taught myself to be content with small victories. I watched the seasons change, and I let the cold months teach me patience. I saved a little at a time. I planted herbs in a tiny box by the window. I made friends with people who looked at me and saw a human, not a problem. But there were nights I carried Sarah's words like a stone in my pocket. I turned it over and over. I wondered why a woman would say such things, why a son would let it be said. I thought of my years feeding him, waking when he was sick in the night, sewing patches on his shirts, and how quickly he had forgotten. Those thoughts could have poisoned me. They could have made me small in spirit. Therefore, I decided the answer would not be bitterness. The answer would be life. If she wanted me gone, I would prove her wrong by staying. If he wanted a house without me, I would give him a house worth missing. I would build slow and steady. I would be the stubborn kind of living that refuses to be erased. But first, I had to keep the little promise I made at the table that night, to myself. So I poured another cup of tea, wrapped my shawl tighter, and wrote a short list: fix the leaky sink, mend the blue dress, visit Mrs. Perez, apply at the diner for an extra shift, breathe, live, love again, in small ways. Therefore, when you see me laugh in the garden or hand you warm bread, remember this: I did not come back from that day by accident. I came back because I chose to. I chose to carry grief like a cat and wheel it into a life that kept growing. But there is more to tell, my child. There is how life takes those small seeds and, with time and patience, grows a storm that cannot be ignored. And when the time comes, I will tell you how the woman they wanted to disappear chose instead to change everything. That night, child, after I told you about the cruel words Sarah spoke at the table, "You should die with him," I could not close my eyes. The walls of my room seemed to move in and out like they were breathing, and the sound of the rain hitting the glass window felt like tiny fists pounding, demanding that I remember. And I did remember. Every word, every silence, every look that told me I was no longer welcome in the house I had once built with my hands and heart. Therefore, I sat in the chair by the window until the sky turned from black to gray, clutching my shawl around me. My body was frail, yes, but my spirit trembled like a bird trapped in a cage. I thought to myself, maybe she is right. Maybe I am useless. Maybe I should vanish like smoke and no one would notice. But then I remembered you, your small hands, your curious eyes, your laughter that sounds like spring water, and I knew I could not surrender. If I gave up, Sarah's words would win. And if Sarah's words won, then the love I gave your grandfather and your father would be wasted. Therefore, the next morning, I rose early and tied my hair back like I used to when I was young. The house smelled faintly of yesterday's bread, and I held on to that smell as proof that I still had something left to offer. I boiled water in the old tin kettle, and as the steam rose into the air, I whispered to myself, "One step at a time, Mary. One step at a time." But life for a woman my age is not gentle. When I knocked on neighbors' doors, asking for work, sewing, cleaning, anything, they smiled politely and shook their heads. "You should rest, dear," one said, as though I were already halfway buried. Another muttered, "Too old, too slow." Their words stung worse than silence. Therefore, I walked farther, my feet aching, until I reached the little diner at the edge of town. The sign above it flickered, and the air smelled of grease and strong coffee. I asked the manager, a heavy man named Bill, if he had any work for me. He squinted, rubbed his chin, and said, "We don't usually hire grandmothers." The word fell from his mouth like an insult. But I did not bow my head. I told him, "Sir, I can wipe tables faster than your young workers can check their phones. I can brew coffee strong enough to keep a man awake through a storm. I will arrive early and stay late. Just give me a chance." Perhaps something in my voice reminded him of his own mother, for he finally nodded. "Fine. Mornings only. Mop, clean, pour coffee. Minimum pay. No excuses." Therefore, I began to walk. My back screamed from bending, and my knees stiffened from standing too long, but my spirit rose a little with each day. I polished silverware until it shone, and I greeted every customer with a smile even when my heart was breaking. Some mornings were cruel, with rude customers and small tips, but when I walked home with that thin envelope of pay, I held it like a medal of survival. But the nights were harder than the days. Nights dragged me back to the empty chair where your grandfather once sat. I whispered to his ghost as if he could still hear. Sometimes tears rolled down my cheeks silently, and I prayed the walls would keep my secrets. Sometimes I pressed the hospital blanket to my face until sleep finally took me. Therefore, I turned to memories not as shackles but as lanterns. I remembered the winters when Tom and I huddled under one coat to stay warm. I remembered when Michael, your father, was just a boy and fell from his bicycle, running to me for comfort. I remembered singing lullabies in the dim light, my voice cracked but steady, rocking him until dawn. But memories cut two ways. They gave me light, yes, but they also gave me pain. For each tender moment reminded me of the boy who had grown into a man capable of standing silent while his wife spit poison at me. That question haunted me: where did my son go? What piece of him vanished to allow such cruelty? Therefore, I began writing letters. Page after page, I wrote to Michael, though I never mailed them. Do you remember the Christmas we couldn't afford gifts, and I baked cookies shaped like stars, and you said they were better than toys? Do you remember how I stayed up all night sewing your jacket so you wouldn't be cold? But after the memories, I wrote the truth: where did that love go, Michael? Why didn't you defend me when she told me to die? Why did you let her break me? I folded those letters and hid them in the wooden box under my bed. Perhaps one day he would find them. Perhaps one day the truth would cut him as it cut me. Therefore, I poured all the love I had left into you, child. When you came, I made pancakes even when the flour jar was nearly empty. I brushed your hair gently and taught you how to stitch a button and water plants. I told you stories about your grandfather's mischief, how he once tied tin cans to a friend's wagon and laughed until tears ran down his face. But more than stories, I gave you lessons born of scars. Respect must be earned. Money can disappear, but kindness remains. Never let another human decide your worth. Therefore, with every smile and every hug, you stitched my broken pieces back together. You gave me proof that my life still mattered. But still, child, the wound of betrayal burned deep. Sarah's words scarred me, but it was your father's silence that nearly destroyed me. Therefore, I began to imagine the day of reckoning, the day when those who looked at me as useless would see that I was the root of the tree they sat under. That without me, there would be no house, no comfort, no family. And child, listen closely, life will give you people who try to measure you with shallow scales. They will say you are not enough, they will strip your dignity, they will try to erase your worth. But your worth lives in your sacrifices, in the love you give, in the courage you carry when no one claps for you. Therefore, I promise you this: I will rise. Not just for myself, but for every woman who was told she was nothing. And when I rise, I will not bow my head. But that, my sweet one, that is for another chapter. Child, lean closer. The rain is tapping again on the tin roof, and it reminds me of that night when I realized the truth: survival alone was not enough. I had survived Sarah's insults, your father's silence, and the weight of loneliness. But survival without dignity is a cage. Therefore, I began to plan, not for vengeance of blood, but for a vengeance of truth. You see, while they laughed at me, while they pushed me to the shadows, I still carried something they had forgotten. When your grandfather passed, he left me his savings and the deeds to land no one thought was worth anything. Old farmland, dry and cracked. Sarah once mocked me, saying, "Who would want that useless debt?" But I held on. I paid the taxes with pennies scraped from my wages at the diner. I carried those deeds like a secret flame in my pocket. Therefore, when the developers came years later, offering millions for that very land, I signed my name with steady hands. The papers whispered louder than Sarah's insults ever could. Suddenly, the useless old woman was worth more than all of them combined. But I did not run to tell them. I stayed quiet. I cooked my own meals, walked to the market, and still wore the same patched shawl. I let them believe I was still the fragile widow clinging to scraps. Why? Because silence, child, is sometimes the sharpest sword. Still, I knew the day would come when they would smell money. And it came sooner than I expected. One Sunday, after years of absence, your father arrived at my little house. His car shone like a mirror, his watch glittered, but his eyes were restless. He kissed my cheek too quickly, as if it burned him, and said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me about the land deal?" I looked at him calmly. My heart was trembling inside. But my voice did not shake. I said, "Because you never asked about anything else." He shifted, embarrassed, but Sarah wasn't embarrassed at all. She leaned forward, her lips painted red, her tone dripping with sweetness and poison. "Mother, we are family. Family should share blessings. Think of your grandchildren. Think of us. Half of it should come to us, it's only fair." Therefore, I let silence stretch like a knife. Then I asked one question: was it fair when you told me to die with my husband? The room froze. Even your father looked away, his face pale. Sarah laughed nervously, muttered something about misunderstandings, but I did not flinch. I stood, my old bones creaking, but my spirit rising like a storm. I told them, "For years I scrubbed floors, carried you, clothed you, fed you. I gave everything. And what did I receive? Silence. Mockery. Cruelty. You looked at me as though I were trash under your shoes. But hear me now, this money is not yours. It will never be yours. Every dollar will go to the one person who never treated me as useless. To the one soul who gave me back my reason to live." I looked at you then, child. You were small, but your eyes widened, and your hand tightened around mine. Sarah's face twisted. "You'll regret this. You're old, you need care, and who will be there when you're sick?" And I answered, "Not you." Therefore, I drew up my will the very next day. The lawyers looked surprised when I said the majority would go into a trust for my grandchild, not my son. But I told them, blood is not enough to inherit love. Actions decide inheritance. But life was not finished testing me. Weeks later, at a family gathering, they tried once more. At Christmas, around that same table where Sarah once told me to die, your father raised his glass and tried to charm me. "Mom, maybe we were harsh. Maybe we didn't always show it, but we do care. Maybe we can start over." For a moment, child, my heart nearly cracked. I wanted to believe him, I wanted to forgive. But then I remembered his silence when I needed one word of defense. I remembered how he let another woman throw me into the fire without raising his voice. Therefore, I smiled, but it was not the smile of surrender. It was the smile of a woman who had seen storms and survived. I lifted my glass and said, "We cannot start over. We can only face what we've done." And you, my son, chose silence. Silence is a choice that speaks louder than words. The room grew heavy with shame. No laughter, no music could fill it. They shifted in their seats, but I did not look away. And so, child, my revenge was not a scream, not a curse, not even anger. My revenge was truth. My revenge was living well despite their cruelty. My revenge was giving all that wealth, all that love, to you, the one who saw me, who listened, who cared. Therefore, when I leave this earth, you will carry my story, not as a burden, but as armor. You will know that strength is not measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who endures with dignity. But listen carefully, the moral is not only revenge. The moral is that love, when betrayed, turns to fire. And that fire can destroy, or it can forge something stronger. I chose to forge. Therefore, child, if ever someone tells you that you are nothing, remember me. Remember the old woman who was told to die, but instead lived long enough to see her enemies choke on their own greed. Remember that survivor is the first victory, but truth is the final one. And when you walk out into the world, walk tall. Because you come from me.